Can you? Welcome. On behalf of our family, thank you for being here. As we celebrate Bernard, or as many of you probably know him, Bernard, maybe Bernie, professor, friend, husband, and loved one.
And thank you to everyone joining us via live stream, our family and longtime friends from around the world, especially Australia and New Zealand and New York and Ohio, places where we spent many meaningful years. We appreciate everyone's love and support.
Following the service, we'd like to invite you to join us in the William Lovelace Fellowship Hall right over here, so we can share stories, memories, and for sure, some laughter. We'll meet you right there. The family will meet you over there.
We will hear a lot of stories today, and we would love for you to share your stories with us on my father's website, bernardataylor.com.
We're here to honor Bernard. He was a light in the world, bringing both heart and mind together. His intellect was extraordinary. You'll hear up here today of his academic achievements recognized around the world. But what stood out even more was how he carried that intellect. It was a relentless pursuit for clarity. He was curious, rigorous, and never content with surface answers. He didn't seek knowledge to impress, but rather to understand. Whether studying ancient text or grappling with current events, he wanted to get to the root of it all.
Dad's empathy shone just as brightly. He had a remarkable ability to see and hear people for who they truly were. He listened with full attention. He offered care without condition. He could often sense what people needed before they even said it or realized it themselves. We'll hear stories today about how he helped others discover and bring their full selves into the world. He also made space for joy and laughter. His humor was not separate from his wisdom, it was a part of it. He could slip a pun into a conversation or even a sermon so subtly you would hear laughter 2 beats later.
This combination of mind and heart, and yes, humor, is what we find ourselves holding on to today. We're living in increasingly dark times where the vulnerable are targeted, truth is abandoned, cruelty is celebrated, empathy is dismissed as weakness, and genocide is openly supported. We need the combination of heart and mind that our dad brought now more than ever. He stood for the opposite. He lived with integrity, humility, wisdom, and compassion. He believed in the power of mind and heart, working together to lift people up. And it's that light we need now, not just to remember him, but to find our way forward.
Dad's favorite word, printed on the cover of the program, was hesed. It's a Hebrew word that no single English word encompasses. It means God's everlasting love, loving kindness, loyalty, compassion, a love that endures. In Hebrew, it is only used to refer to God's love. Chesed is what Dad tried to embody in his own life, and it's what he passed on to us.
And as he said in his final days, what it all comes down to is God is love. That wasn't just his theology. That was his way of being in this world. And if we take just a fraction of that love forward, he shines on through us.
Let us pray together. God, we celebrate today this scholar, this man of wisdom, of empathy, of compassion. We celebrate how you worked in him to touch others, to minister to others, to be your guiding and shining light. Lord, we also mourn that he's no longer in our presence. We mourn who he is, who he was. And yet, Lord, we are reminded in Matthew 5 that those who mourn will be comforted. Lord, today, as we celebrate both the celebration of life and mourn, we just ask that you would surround us here with your everlasting and ever-present love, that you would comfort us, that you would surround us, that you would move in each of our hearts in the way that we need to be moved, that you would reveal something to each of us that we may need to see. We thank you for this time to celebrate and to mourn together with you. Amen.
When we returned to Loma Linda University to teach here in 2007, I did not think I would find a new bosom friend. Bosom friends are the gifts of our younger years. It is less likely to find a bosom friend as we get older. And yet it happened to me. Not long after we came back to our alma mater, I met Bernard Taylor, and we became bosom friends. I cannot remember exactly how it happened, but I know that we bonded early on. I had my medical background, some years of pastoral work, and then my PhD studies at the University of St. Andrews before returning here. I was a novice in relation to my new teaching responsibilities. Bernard was a Loma Linda veteran. As a biblical scholar, he played in the major league. I could tell the difference early as he shared things from his educational experience. The Adventist Church has never had a better trained scholar in biblical languages than Bernard Taylor. Septuagint scholarship straddles at least 3 languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. The Septuagint was the first translation of the Hebrew Bible. Bernard knew them all these languages and their cognates. Here is an example from his comprehensive exam at the Hebrew Union College in 1982. This is the assignment. Compare the Hebrew and Greek texts of 1 Samuel 21, 1-5, and 7-8. By translating into English those passages where these versions disagree, and analyzing points of disagreement where it seems worthwhile. His answers make for interesting reading because they are precise and confident, and they help us understand why Bernard was entrusted the task of translating 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 Kings for the New English translation of the Septuagint, published by Oxford University Press in 2007. Let me say it again. Such assignments are only given to scholars who play in the major league, as Bernard did in the context of the Society of Biblical Literature, the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies. For 5 years, he was the editor of their book series, and as the author of the Analytical Lexicon of the Septuagint. For years, our lunch conversations, his and mine, on Fridays in the faculty dining room was a weekly highlight, I believe, for both of us. When I worked on my most demanding writing project I have ever undertaken, my book, God of Sense and Traditions of Nonsense, Bernard agreed to line edit it, checking all footnotes and references and bibliography and the like. But he did much more. Out of a shared interest in textual detail, he ran a quality check on all the translations, and we discussed content in detail, chapter by chapter. Let me give you an example from the horrendous story of the gang rape of the concubine in Judges 19. Was the concubine unfaithful to the Levite, as some translate the Hebrew text? Or did she get angry with him, as the Septuagint has it? Or did he, the Levite, whose concubine she was, heaven forbid, did he force her into prostitution to make her the oldest Me Too story on record? It makes a difference to know, doesn't it? It made a difference to Bernard. I came into biblical studies over a crucial point in Pauline studies, the novelty that the expression pistis Christou should be translated the faithfulness of Christ, not faith in Christ, as the answer to God's apparent absence, and not as the answer to God's alleged anger, as Martin Luther thought. It was huge for me the day Bernard told me that the evidence favors the faithfulness of Christ, and that Paul had in common with Habakkuk a concern about God's apparent absence. We had many such conversations in person and on Skype after we returned to Norway. We were both aware that as we get more frail, there is a tendency to withdraw and even to disappear from one another. Bernard and I had agreed that that was not going to happen to us. We renewed the vow during the past year with tears because we realized that we might be running out of time. We renewed it again in December, but when I left his house that day, I felt that I might not see him again in this life, and so it shall be. I've seen a book on Bernard's bookshelf that expresses his life's interest and disposition. The title of the book is The Word of the Humble God, with the subtitle, The Origins, Inspiration, and Interpretation of Scripture. It's written by Karen Keene. It was published in 2022. It's a recent book. The thought that God is humble is sobering in a time when bragging, exaggeration, and shameless self-praise seem to win the day. How fitting, I thought, how remedial and timely to recall Bernard's eloquent, winsome, illuminating reflections in a time submerged in incendiary tweets. How grateful I am, how grateful I believe many of you are to have been taught the word of the humble God by a man made humble by the word and the God he loved and admired.
Bernard and I go way back. In fact, I knew Bernard before some of you renamed him Bernard, and so that says we go a long way back. I knew him when he was Pastor Taylor and long before Dr. Taylor. In fact, our family connections go even further back. Eleanor's father was a groomsman in my parents' wedding in 1941 in Auckland, New Zealand. So our families have had touch points for a long time. And I've been asked to just reflect a little on Bernard, the pastor, particularly in those early years. As you know from your program, Bernard graduated with a bachelor's degree in theology from Avondale College in 1966 and pastored in New Zealand and Sydney before we joined up in 1971. Our connection was immediate. Notwithstanding our odd couple professional interests, he was destined to specialise in biblical languages, as Sigve has shared, and I was a psychologist in waiting. And we've often reflected how with different interests we were still very closely connected. In his pastoral identity, Bernard was a great front man. He was very comfortable in platform presence and presentation. Those years in Sydney were typical. Evangelistic campaigns, Bible studies, preaching, visitation, late night schedules, long hours, weekend commitments, expectations for baptisms and church growth markers, all the usual stuff that we pastors got involved in. And unfortunately, common for the era, the neglect of our own families at times as we got involved in all that work. Now, I'm not exactly sure how Bernard and Eleanor made their decision to pursue further study, but I do know when. It was what we lovingly call a call to a small rural town in Victoria. amidst his study program at Sydney University, the signal was that it was time to go. It was clear he saw his contribution to pastoral ministry through significant scholarship. I've got the next little section just in italics, and for people who read their stuff, it's usually like, will I dare to say this? But now that it's there, I'll have a shot. A memory. There was a time in the transition of cultural norms that being, what shall I call it, Terry? Yes, being bald was not the fashion statement that it is today. It was feared. Toupees were the substitute, and Bernard was a reluctant participant. By the time they left Australia, he had come to terms with his new style. The toupee was gone. When Bernard and Eleanor farewelled us at Brisbane Airport in 1978, I can still see it. They walked across the tarmac, as you did all the time in those days, no air bridges. And Bernard turned as he walked, and with a flourish of his cap, revealing his new style, they bid farewell to us. I remember it clearly. And I remember thinking at the time, there's more to that farewell than a simple goodbye, as he became the new stage in his life. So the next decade was graduate school supported by pastoring, Cincinnati, New York, and eventually here at Loma. I've spent a fair bit of time thinking about Bernard the pastor, and some things are quite obvious. First and foremost, he was a teacher. He loved to share his insights, his knowledge. Nothing gave him more pleasure than to dig deeply into his topic. Whether it was the classroom, the pulpit, the seminar series, or his beloved Schumann Sabbath School, all his audiences were his students. Second, and there's many more, and I've just limited myself to a couple, he brought precision and structure to whatever he did. His personality was well suited to chairing the conference constitution committee, for example. In his preparations, only Bernard could find true excitement in the subtle adjustment of a conjugated verb, or rescue the hidden meanings from the depths of deponency. And I don't even know what that word means, but he kept telling me that it was very important, so it had to get a mention. Of course, his editing skills while he pastored were legendary. A missed comma was bad enough. A spelling mistake ranked close to the unpardonable sin. Now, for those of you who knew that, if you read the program today, if you find an error, it's intentional. We expect to get copy from Bernard and the correction. There are more subtle aspects to Bernard the pastor, and like others who honour scholarship, working for a denominational system had its challenges. Bernard was not overtly a rebellious type, but the function of systems, the expectations, the roles and goals of others didn't always fit easily, but he accepted. Another thing, Bernard loved the role of pastor, but he longed for the role of full-time professor. And there was disappointment that this never eventuated. However, many a conversation between us ended with a quiet reflection. Where else in the Adventist system could I study, teach and minister and do all in abundance? I mean, if it wasn't for the university, then here, except at Loma. So thank you, to this church, to this school, and this community for embracing him. I'm going to add one other little thing that's in italics. Well, no, it's not quite, but I notice a few in pink here today. Hi, guys. We know you're just getting ready for tomorrow, for your run. For those of you who are wondering what the pink is all about, it's not a fire sale at Marshall's. It is actually the Lopers and their uniform, and they're here. You were an important part of his love and pastoral identity. If Bernard were able, all he would need to say today is, I have fought the good fight, I have kept the faith, I have finished the race. And you above all others would know what that meant. So thank you and blessings.
It was at Avondale in 1965 that I first met Bernard. He was in his third year of ministerial studies. I was in my first. I was feeling very insecure, shy, and frightened out of my wits that I might not be able to succeed at university studies. During that first term, I virtually lived in the library, using every spare minute, trying to complete assignments, trying to master my readings. Bernard had observed me. He was also one who tended to live in the library, although he had no real need to. One afternoon, he collected up his books and papers and came and sat opposite me at the long library table, introduced himself and said he had noticed that I tended to spend a lot of time there in the library. He asked me how things were going, where I was from, and he promptly set out to befriend me, put me at ease, and offered to help with that difficult Greek 1 subject. His friendship helped me adjust much more quickly, and I was grateful. Bernard was like that. He took an interest in the shy and the quiet and the insecure. Our mutual friend, Kevin Price, told me that he had first encountered Bernard in the same caring way back in elementary school in Melbourne. Although our class schedules differed, our surnames, beginning with T and V, with only a little U between them, meant that we were always alphabetically very close. On the rosters for chapel and evening worship and morning worship, as it was in those days at Avondale. So as we sat together or crossed each other, finding our seat along the row, Bernard continued to take an interest in me during the next couple of years to check on my welfare and progress. In 1977, after a decade in ministry for him, 8 years for me, we both found ourselves back at Avondale, sitting in adjacent desks for an Andrews University Extension School class under Dr. Jim Cox, digesting a double serving of Jim on the Gospel of John. One class in Johannine theology, the other in Johannine literature. By this time, Bernard had already furthered his Greek language skills with considerable part-time study in the classics department at Sydney University. It was fun to sit next to him and to hear him with his probing questions of Dr. Cox and his challenging questions to him. But still, the new idea, just the possibility that Jesus' sayings in John's Gospel might not be ipsissima verba, that was the word, it threw us both and our classmates, threw us for a loop. And we had many long walks and talks together as we wrestled with the implications of that expression for our very inadequate understanding of the doctrine of inspiration at that time. Bernard's scholarship, even then, was a great help to me. This encounter with new learning under Jim Cox ignited a passion in both of us for further knowledge and understanding. Later, and as a consequence, both of our families, quite independently and unknowing about each other's movements, sold up every last asset that we had accumulated in order to fund ourselves to study in Michigan, to continue our master's program and further doctoral studies. It was a radical, life-changing step of faith for both of our families. My family arrived on campus a few months before Bernard, and Alna arrived a little later with their 2 youngsters, but we finished our MA degrees around the same time. I recall long discussions with Bernard as he worked through the decision of whether to stay at the seminary or whether he should go elsewhere. I think Larry Garrity helped him make that decision, but his journey took him to Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati. I'd been granted limited partial tuition assistance for my studies. In order to study, Bernard had had to make a clean break from the SPD without support, and it was difficult. But he was passionate about learning, costly though it was. Other Aussies alongside us at Andrews had full salary and tuition scholarships. Many were the occasions when we both commiserated together as we struggled to survive within the excruciatingly tight constraints of student budgets, and we lamented what we perceived at the time to be the limited strictures of church policy and the seeming inequities in its application. But we were both blessed with wives who believed in us, Eleanor and Gail, women willing to give their all to help us succeed. One memorable Christmas break, my family travelled from Berrien Springs and crowded into Bernard and Eleanor's apartment, tiny apartment down there in Cincinnati. Among the Christmas presents we exchanged that year were some unusually large, soft teddy bears. Bernard and I had found them late on Christmas Eve after the children had gone to sleep, and we had taken the rubbish downstairs to the skip bin in the basement. The soft toys were grubby and worn, and they'd been thrown out by some family on the move. Bernard and I called Eleanor and Gail to come down and check things out. That night, the rescued bears were laundered and dried and absolutely delighted our youngsters, unknowing the origin of them, the next morning. A long-remembered moment of bonding, truly. Our paths in later years crossed again in upstate New York, but more frequently in Loma Linda. I would come in while on furlough, and Bernard and Alna would graciously provide accommodation. Bernard, seemingly without protest, would lend me his precious home office space, sometimes for a couple of weeks at a time, while I worked in the Davis Library Heritage Room and wrote at night. He was like that, willing to put himself out for others. Our academic discipline areas diverged quite widely, but he was always intrigued with what I was working on, and he eagerly shared with me the intricate details of the textual and lexical work that he was deep into. I was amazed at his ability to work with complex databases and the network of expert colleagues he moved amongst. To learn later that he was also a teaching colleague of my beloved Kendra just adds to the aura around him. His friendship with and encouragement of this peripatetic Kiwi has been a rich, treasured blessing, and I am deeply, deeply grateful. Thank you.
In the expanded edition of Bernard's book, Analytical Lexicon to the Septuagint, the dedication reads like this: dedicated to the memory of my father, Fred L. Taylor, whose love of learning was contagious. I never met Fred Taylor, but his son Bernard had caught the learning infection and continued that tradition. Bernard's love of learning was contagious too, for decades of students going through La Sierra University. Several years after I arrived at La Sierra as an assistant professor, our School of Religion dean, John Jones, wondered if I would be willing to teach first-year Greek sometime. If I did so, it would free up Bernard to use his gifted linguistic skills to teach other courses, advanced Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, Latin. Since I had never taught beginning Greek before, I decided to first sit in Bernard's class to see his approach to introducing biblical Greek to undergraduates. Thinking at first I would attend just a few weeks or perhaps the first quarter, I found myself attending his class in between teaching my own for an entire school year. His knowledge of the nuances of the language was like nothing I had experienced before. And I had taken Greek as both an undergraduate and in master's and doctoral programs, including the Graduate Theological Union at Berkeley. His teaching techniques were by far the clearest and most engaging. He got me excited about teaching, wait for it, Greek. When Gil and I got engaged, I was surprised to learn that he and Bernard's friendship went back to their college days. In one of many treasured moments in their home, Bernard and Elena agreed to read 1 Corinthians 13 at our wedding. It was such a blessing for our new combined family to have friends with us that day in Riverside, California, who knew Gil and his sons from Australia. Years later, Gil and I would attend a session at the annual conference of the Society of Biblical Literature in support of Bernard, who was one of the presenters. We listened as Bernard, standing in front of a large audience of biblical Greek scholars and professors, argued for doing away with deponent verbs. And we heard the reactions of those around us. They were impressed. Even those not yet convinced were impressed. He was reshaping a key aspect of the discipline. We didn't understand all that Bernard was saying, but Gil and I were so proud that we knew him and that he was our friend. John Jones notes that another significant part of Bernard's public ministry has been his regular participation over a couple of decades and more as a panelist on Searching for Answers, the popular weekly telecast on the Loma Broadcasting Network with worldwide viewership. His spiritual insights into biblical teachings arising from his thorough linguistic knowledge and delivered in terms that spoke to the Christian lives of ordinary lay people, often with a touch of his gentle trademark humor, contributed definitively to the program's success. Several months ago, I was preparing to begin teaching his beloved Sabbath School class here at Loma Linda, and I told him, I have never been so intimidated to teach. And he told me to stop being so silly. And then I reminded him, but your class, is used to someone who can bring in literary echoes to the Septuagint and later rabbinic reflections and the teasing out of linguistic nuances from multiple biblical languages. After pausing for a moment of reflection, he responded, they are a wonderful group of people. In the words of one member of that class, representing so many, we were privileged to be tutored by a biblical scholar extraordinaire. His class strengthened our faith. He would remind us that the Bible is a collection of stories that answer the question, what is God like? It was a sad day for the class when Dr. Taylor decided to retire, but he gave us a lasting gift that changed our way of studying the Bible. What a gift. What a legacy.
If anyone had asked me 5 weeks ago if I would be here now doing what I'm trying to do, I would have answered with an emphatic no. Definitely not. And surely none of you present today here in the sanctuary wanted to be here now doing what we are doing. But, since this is the place and this is the time our dear Bernard is being remembered, honored, and celebrated, there is no other place we want to be. I'm grateful I'm able to participate in this special memorial time. And yes, I am certain that is true for each of you, too. Surely, there was only one Bernard A. Taylor. He had unique ways of becoming part of each of us. I respected and loved him from the first time I met him. He and Alana and the family were in New York, where I was at Union Springs for the New York camp meeting. I followed the summer camp meeting circuit for Faith for Today in those years. Bernard was platform chairman for my first assignment there. Scholar that I later knew him to be, caused me more than slight reflection on his kindness and respect when he had to endure my presentations. We were together on at least one other occasion. We both enjoyed an opportunity to reconnect. The years passed. I retired from Faith for Today and ended up at Loma University Church post-retirement. Again, I was blessed to associate with Bernard. Even though there were lots of intervening experiences since we first met, we seemed to pick up where we left off. That was because of Bernard's generous spirit and respect for others with him in ministry pursuits. It was here at Loma Linda that I got to participate with Bernard in a special and atypical ministry experience. I was invited to be a Sabbath School lesson presenter here in the sanctuary when general Sabbath School programs were still provided for the United Congregation. Because I was more comfortable with dialogue than monologue, I asked Bernard to join me in a lesson presentation. He graciously agreed. That was the first of several dialogue Sabbath School lessons we shared. Even some folks here this afternoon maybe will remember Bernard and Dan's Sabbath Schools. The give and take and interaction with the audience seemed to be not only instructional, but Sabbath School was fun. That let the Matthews and the Taylors connect so that we have best memories. And there were other times, other experiences and places. Not the least of those has been Bernard's leadership of the Weniger Society for Excellence. Our common interests let us be together, pray together, and rejoice that our ways in life made it possible for recurring connections so that genuinely we feel part of each other. Finally, typically, and maybe even uniquely, Bernard's strong can-do spirit remained active as he reached for his last breaths. And it seems so ultimately appropriate that he was at peace and found rest on Sabbath. Miss you, Bernard. Rest in peace, brother. I'll see you in the morning.
I first met Bernard at Andrews University when he arrived to advance his education at the seminary in 1978. He, an already experienced pastor with a more than average knowledge of biblical Hebrew from studies at Sydney University in Australia, and I, still a new Hebrew Bible and archaeology professor at the seminary. He signed up for my Aramaic class, where I quickly realized that I had a scholar on my hands. The seminary was only a way station in his quest for a doctoral degree in biblical studies. He engaged me in conversation about the best place for him to do this. Given his knowledge and goals, I suggested Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati, Ohio. I told him I knew of no Adventist who had attended there, but in light of his goal to become proficient in Hebrew, I knew of no better place. I had a personal friendship with a couple of the professors there and wrote them recommendations for Bernard. He went on to get his doctorate there in 1989 with distinction, writing an important text-critical dissertation which was published in 2 volumes by Scholars Press in the Harvard Monograph series. Through the years, we maintained a friendship by correspondence and at meetings of scholarly societies, particularly the Adventist Society for Religious Studies and the Society for Biblical Literature, where he chaired the seminar for electronic standards for biblical language texts. At SBL, he distinguished himself as a leader and convener of sessions on Septuagint studies in particular. In fact, he became a noted authority on computer-assisted tools for Septuagint studies. He edited the Bulletin for the International Organization for Septuagint and Cognate Studies and was the secretary for the New English Septuagint Translation Committee. In the Oxford University Press edition of the Septuagint, he himself translated the Old Testament books of Samuel and Kings, as you've heard. He is particularly well known for his widely used 1994 analytic lexicon to the Septuagint, A Complete Parsing Guide, published by Zondervan. Even in press now, he has articles in the Textual History of the Bible to be published by Brill. I was delighted when we were able to renew our friendship here in Southern California. He is a scholar in residence at Loma University Church, and I at La Sierra University. For several years, in addition to his pastoral duties, which included organizing Winter Wednesdays, Mind and Spirit, and the famous Sabbath School class that you've heard about, he taught key Greek, Hebrew, and Latin classes at La Sierra, especially to MDiv students. I was disappointed when he was not chosen for dean of the HMS Richards Divinity School. Bernard served the broader church as well. For 2 terms, as you've heard, he chaired the Constitution Committee for the Southeastern California Conference, and for a term was secretary of the Pacific Union Conference Constitution Committee. One of my favorite memories was the year he joined the Loma Linda University Church Holy Land Tour, organized by Shirley Gregg and led by Randy Roberts. When we were in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity, I made sure to take the group downstairs into the grotto where the church father, Jerome, commissioned by Pope Damasus I in the late 4th century, translated from the Greek biblical manuscripts what we call the Latin Vulgate, the version that became the authorized Bible of the Roman Catholic Church. This stop was not an advertised part of the tour, so it became as a surprise for Bernard. I'll never forget how excited he was when he learned where we were. I asked him to tell the group about Jerome and the importance to Bible history of what was accomplished there in that cave. And without a moment's hesitation, he gave us an authoritative lecture on the Vulgate and its importance in the history of Bible translation. Most of you will know about the Charles Winnegar Awards for Excellence, colloquially known as the Adventist Oscars. Given Bernard's standard of excellence in everything he did, he was an obvious candidate himself for that award in 2010. When I retired as chair of the Winiger Society, Bernard was just retiring from his role here in the University Church, so I recommended that he take my place, something he did with distinction from 2014 to 2020. As with everything he did, he took the Winiger service and awards to another level of excellence and is largely responsible, along with his successor, Dick Osborne, for the reputation this award, after 50 years, has enjoyed today. As we look back today on the life and contributions of Bernard Taylor, let's not forget his alma mater, Hebrew Union College, chose him, a non-Jew, Alumnus of the Year in 2014, where he was given the Graduate School Medallion. And his undergraduate alma mater, Avondale College, chose him Alumnus of the Year in 2016. I still say no Adventist scholar knew Biblical Hebrew and Septuagint Greek better than he did. He was modest about his role in academe, but those of us who were his students, colleagues, and friends hold him in the highest possible esteem, in fact, in a class by himself. The voice of one of our most eminent scholars is now quiet, but his scholarship and the impact he had on his students and friends lives on. May he rest in peace.
The family adored Bernard, and he continued to be a favorite due to his sunny disposition and the friendships that he made with people. We had developed common interests, including classical music and cricket, and on many afternoons, Bernard and I could be found practicing our cricket skills in the driveway of the house for hours. Some years later, that I received a scholarship for a PhD in America. We were at the ship setting sail for America and saying goodbye to Bernard and Eleanor, when Bernard said to me for the first time, "I'm hoping that one day I can follow you to study in America." So some years later, there was a joyous reunion in Loma Linda, where I was now a faculty member. And when Bernard, Eleanor, and family arrived on their way to Andrews University, this was the first of many joyous celebrations together that we've had in America. Later, our joy overflowed when Bernard was invited to be a resident scholar in the Loma Linda University Church. And then Bill and Nolene Johnson moved to Loma Linda. And we celebrate now by meeting together for Sabbath lunch, for good food and stimulating conversation. I will miss Bernard's presence in those discussions. We look forward to a time when we can all celebrate together in one place.
Hello, I'm Bernard's big sister, Nolene. As a 5-year-old with 2 brothers, I constantly begged my parents for a baby sister. But along came this baby boy. To us, he was Bernard. You probably know him as Bernard. I loved to play with Bernard's hair, forming a curl on top. I know most of you don't think of hair and Bernard in the same sentence, but he had lovely blonde hair as a little boy. I would curl his damp hair around my finger and leave it to dry, and it would stay that way. Up there in the holy city, if you see a woman running her hair through her hands through Bernard's hair, don't worry, that will just be me.
I'm Kelvin Taylor. Bernard was my younger brother. From early childhood, we did everything together. For my whole life, he has been my best friend, and I miss him very much.
I'm Annalie. I'm Coraline. This is Chloe. And we are here to share a couple of our favorite stories from family trips with Granddad.
One that I was thinking about was my first backpacking trip when I was 7. And it was really short, but it felt like a big deal to me because it was like first time camping, not right by the cars. It was only like a mile, but I just remember it being really, really fun, and like exploring nature with all our family and Granddad, and like having breakfast together in the morning and everything. And it felt like we were in the middle of nowhere. And I was a little more like scared because we were kind of in the middle of nowhere, or what I felt like for 7-year-old me. And so I was like a little more on edge going to sleep. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night to this sound, and I convinced myself it was a bear. And I was so sure there was a bear like circling our tent. I couldn't fall back to sleep for a really long time. But then I found out either the next morning or like a year later, I don't know, somehow I found out that it wasn't a bear at all. It was just my Granddad in the other tent snoring, sleeping wonderfully. So that trip was just a really great memory for me with our whole family and spending time with them in nature.
And a lot of camping trips after that.
Yeah, and so many camping trips after that, just camping in general.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories is when we all went to Alaska, a family of 4, and Alma and Granddad. And it was on Granddad's bucket list to see the Northern Lights, and none of us had seen them before. So we all stayed in a little cabin, and we set up all of our warm gear by the door so that we'd be ready as fast as we could to get out and see them. We had all been outside looking for a while, getting pretty cold. It was pretty snowy.
It was pretty late too.
It was late. It was very, yeah, it had to be dark. And eventually everyone kind of trickled back inside except for Granddad. And he brought out a chair, and he was all bundled up, staring at the sky.
In the middle of all the snow, just like staked out in a chair.
And so the rest of us had gone inside to like warm up a little bit or whatever. And then we heard him calling from outside suddenly, and everyone got to the door super fast. We put on all of our gear, record speed, and we rushed outside, and we were all able to see the beautiful Northern Lights together because of his persistence. Yeah. Yeah. And so it was really cool for us all to experience that for the first time together. And yeah, we had a lot of awesome trips after that too.
And so many good memories. It was hard to pick these two.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Pastor Kevin Price. Bernard was my friend, or as we say in Australia, mate. We first met in 1955. Now, that's a long way back. Our dads worked in the same union conference office, and this was my first day at Hawthorne Adventist School in Melbourne, Victoria. And Bernard was there to befriend me, show me around, make sure I felt comfortable in my new school. I was telling this story to Cal Stewart, a mutual friend from that era at that school, and he said, "Hey, Bernard did that for me too." Bernard was that type of guy. I went on to room with Bernard at Avondale College, now Avondale University. I said I roomed with him, but actually I roomed with him plus his amateur radio along the window. And during the night, he'd be talking around the world to other people and keeping a log of all the people that he had contacted. I recall his call sign in Australia was VK2AZY. It's a pity he's not here to reassure me I was right or correct me if I was wrong. He was a stickler for detail. Another great memory, he was a bit of an early adopter of things that were a little different. He had one of the first Mazdas in Australia, a great little car, and I had a Renault, a French car. He had an auntie, Bernard had an auntie in Perth, Western Australia, right across the country, and he and Eleanor and myself and my wife Sue did a trip right across Australia and back, thousands of kilometres of dirt road. It was a great experience. Bernard, you're missed. You're a good friend, a great mate.
Hi, I'm Pastor Raymond Coombe. Bernard and I were classmates in high school 66 years ago. He was a good friend, my best friend, and we were good buddies. In fact, he helped me by reading information from the blackboard when I was short-sighted. He was a competitive at table tennis, had a mean spin. We went on to Avondale College together and then worked as interns in pastoral ministry in New Zealand together. Bernard was a progressive individual, proficient in using a slide rule long before anyone else in the class, and he was sensitive to people in ministry, exemplified by his own commitment to caring for his mother who suffered from arthritis. And he was passionate about biblical languages, which is what led to his outstanding achievements in teaching Old Testament and New Testament Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. The last 50 plus years we've been separated by distance, but that bond of brotherly love and commitment has never diminished. I miss my friend, Dr. Bernard Taylor.
My name is Dawn Sarche, and I'm an ordained Presbyterian minister in Cincinnati, Ohio. In the fall of 1979, Bernard Taylor and I entered the doctoral program at Hebrew Union College, the Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. Being in graduate school with Bernard transformed the entire experience for me, not only because of his brilliant mind and his quick wit and those unforgettable puns, but also because Bernard treated me with profound respect as a colleague. We encouraged each other, we cheered for each other, we pushed each other to be our best, and sometimes we liked to best each other just for the fun of it. But what I cherish the most about Bernard and my memory of those years is that Bernard always treated me with respect as an ordained minister who just happened to be a woman. He never put me down, and he never stood for someone else to do so. He stood up for me and encouraged me and enabled me to feel welcome and whole.
Ron and Deria Gaston here. We are so excited that we can talk and say yes to Dr. T. Thank you, Dr. T, for all that you did for us. For Alana, Clinton, and Danelle, our hearts hurt with you. We will miss him, but we learned so much from him. The joy, the puns, the laughter, the humor, those sad jokes that we used to say, okay, Pastor T, really? And we just loved him so much, and we will miss him.
We have memories of him preaching up there with his Greek Bible. Who does that? I remember a sermon from John where he was talking, where in John chapter 3, Jesus is talking with Nicodemus and says to Nicodemus, you must be born anathen. Anathen? Dr. T says, yes, it has two meanings, born from above and born again. That's the kind of pastor we had. What a wonderful man that he was. We'll look forward to seeing him again in Jesus' second coming. We love you guys.
Occasionally, within a university, one runs across a very rare teacher. The type of person who not only provides clear explanations in their lectures, but also inspires the students to explore more deeply. Professor Taylor was just such a teacher. I first met him when he was teaching a course on the Didache during the Winter Wednesdays series at the Loma University Church. The Didache was a 1st century CE document dealing with Christianity. The insights were so profound, I looked for other opportunities to learn from him and found that he was running a Sabbath School class every week in which he would bring rough draft translations of books that he was translating for use in future publications. The class was fascinating, and to watch a scholar in biblical languages work through difficult texts was very worthwhile. The work ultimately resulted in the publication of a New English translation of the Septuagint published by the Oxford University Press, in which Dr. Taylor had translated a number of the books. He inspired me also in his later classes, which he taught around the books of John and Ruth, to become interested in biblical languages on an amateur level. He would occasionally help me when I was struggling with some concepts in these languages, and in retrospect, I realized that this was very similar to a Nobel laureate helping an elementary school student with a science project. My only regret is that I didn't know the subjects well enough to fully benefit from his tremendous understanding, scholarship, and intellect. Many of the members within his classes have expressed a deep regret at his loss. One of them asked that I share a particular quote. Dr. Maureen Bull, the wife of Brian Bull, asked me to read the following. I wish Brian was here to eloquently express his appreciation of Bernard's Sabbath School classes, which we both attended for many years. On one particular Sabbath, Bernard discussed at length that the first verse of Genesis could be better translated, to begin with, God brought into existence the sky and the land. Brian realized the great significance of Bernard's observation. Years later, in 2010, together with Professor Fritz Guy, the booklet entitled God, Sky, and Land was published. 2 other booklets followed, and in 2024, a hardback copy of all 3 was published by Spectrum Adventist Forum with the title Hearing Genesis, a Trilogy. I doubt it would ever have come into existence without the encouragement and profound understanding of Hebrew that Bernard shared with us each Sabbath. He will long be remembered as both a distinguished scholar and a true friend. I am very happy that I was able to get to know him and learn from him. My only regret is that he left us far too soon.
Reading a text out of context is a pretext, as Bernard Taylor would remind our Sabbath School class. My name is Danielle Wichnich, and I was a member of his class for nearly 30 years. Reading within context was not new. It's how I read the law. But I was never taught to read the Bible this way. Bernard's deep understanding of both Hebrew and Greek not only opened the text, but illuminated it. I was privileged to be tutored by such an extraordinary biblical scholar. His class strengthened my faith. It was a sad day when he retired, but he gave me a lasting gift that changed my way of reading and studying the Bible.
Hello, my name is Kevin Cadornes, and I have had the pleasure of knowing Mr. Taylor for over 10 years as his endocrinologist here at Loma University. I knew when I met Mr. Taylor over 10 years ago that we were going to hit it off right away. He has this quick wit, and on each visit, I knew that he was just waiting for me to say something so he could jump in with one of his famous puns and just brighten the day and our visit together. I knew when Mr. Taylor was on my schedule, I was going to have a special day, and many times our visits made my day because of that interaction that we had together. And over time, he not only became a patient, but he became a friend, and I so appreciate him for that. I saw Christ in him every time that we met, in the way that he cared for himself, the way he cared for his family, and just his attitude towards everything, which I so appreciated. These past couple years have been difficult, watching him go through some health issues, and it has been hard, but I continue to see his love for his family, his love for God, and that was always his priority in everything that we talked about. I will miss Mr. Taylor for many different reasons, but above all, I will miss my friend, and I will miss the conversations that we have together. But waiting for the day that I will see him again in heaven, and I hope Mr. Taylor has a pun saved up for me when we see each other again. I'm sure he will. Thank you.
My name is Wayne Dysinger, and I had the privilege of being Bernard Taylor's friend as well as his physician. As his friend, I loved Bernard's mind. It was just such a comprehensive, creative mind that I thoroughly enjoyed interacting with. I also loved his caring. He cared so much about our friendship. He cared so much about his community, and especially about his family. As his physician, I loved the way Bernard engaged. I'm a lifestyle medicine physician, and he engaged so fully around how he ate, how he exercised, how he managed his stress. He just did what was the right thing for his body. And I have to believe that that gave him 15 years extra of life. His mom, who had a lot of the similar symptoms that he had, symptoms that were not easy to understand, but I believe may have had a genetic component to them, his mom died 15 years younger than Bernard. So Bernard, there's a big space as you're not with us now, but you've left a beautiful legacy, a legacy that we can only hope to simulate, a legacy that we will remember and that we will use to inspire ourselves and others.
Hi, my name is Miguel Mendez, and I am a pastor at the Loma University Church and a former student and mentee of my good friend Bernard Taylor. Bernard was a professor who made me fall in love with Scripture. His scholarship and his sense of humor made the text come alive. I remember once he threw up his hands and said, "I don't know how I am expected to teach you all Greek if you can barely speak English properly." For the next quarter, he spent time developing our grasp for our mother tongue. My love for language is because of Bernard, and so I am going to miss him deeply, both his friendship, his scholarship, but above all, his care for us.
I remember the first time I met Dr. Bernard Taylor. It was in La Sierra Hall on the campus of La Sierra University. He always walked in looking elegant and sophisticated. And for a moment, I thought he didn't belong in this classroom full of, let's just say, college students who are trying to find themselves. Many of us were also wrestling with our call to ministry, trying to make sense of what that meant. And yet, here was Dr. Taylor, one of the brightest scholars in our denomination, perhaps the world, coming to teach beginning Greek. I have to confess, when I first approached him, I didn't want to admit that I had already taken the class and failed miserably. So I asked, Dr. Taylor, what can I do to master your class? Though deep down, what I really meant was, what can I do just to pass? He was probably surprised by my question, but he answered graciously. He took an interest in me. He gave me advice, extra work, and time. Yes, he commuted from Loma Linda, and many times he arrived early, stayed late, making sure I understood. For the first time, I did. Surprisingly, at the end of the quarter, I not only passed, but I got an A. They came second quarter. He was also our professor, and for some reason I passed. I got another A. Third quarter came, another A. And before finals that year, Dr. Taylor asked me a question I have never considered. Have you thought about graduate school? He told me there weren't many Hispanic scholars in theology, the area of religion. As an immigrant, this was something I had never imagined for myself. I didn't have many role models who shared my background, who would guide me down that path. But Dr. Taylor saw something in me before I could see it in myself. Even after I left the classroom, I kept in touch with him. No matter how busy he was, he always made time to listen, to encourage, to share his work with me, sometimes at a level I couldn't understand. But he never stopped investing in me. And because of that, I eventually did go to grad school. I earned my master's, I earned my PhD. And when I finally graduated, I contacted him and told him, I would not be here without you. Dr. Taylor's legacy is not only in his academic work, but in the life of students he mentored, the churches he faithfully served, and the family and friends who shared in his journey. I will forever be grateful that he took the time to mentor an average student like myself. And I'm grateful to the Taylor family for sharing him with all of us. He will be missed, but his impact lives on in all of us who were shaped by his kindness, his wisdom, and his belief in us, even before we believe in ourselves. Until the resurrection, Dr. Taylor, we will see you again.
Alana, Clinton, Danelle, and the rest of Bernard's beloved family. In the midst of the bittersweet emotions of sorrow and sadness and loss, I hope that you might have been able to revel in some of the realities of your husbands and your dads, granddads, father-in-laws, etc. life. What a rich legacy Bernard leaves. This will not cover everyone here. I want to say that up front. But I would nevertheless like to get just a bit of a feel for Bernard's family of who is here. So if you would humor me for a moment, if you were a scholarly colleague of Bernard's, would you stand for a moment? I hope family will turn around and look. Beautiful. All around the sanctuary. Thank you so much. You may be seated. If you were a member of Bernard's Sabbath School class, would you stand? Look at this. Wow, right over here to my right and your left, as well as around the sanctuary. That's wonderful. If you were a member of the Lopers, would you stand? Well, look at that. Is that amazing? That's beautiful. If you first and foremost knew Bernard in Australia, would you stand? Ah, beautiful. Look at them wave at each other. If you knew Bernard primarily as a member of the Loma Linda University Church and he was one of your pastors, would you stand? Ah, that's by far the largest group. How beautiful that is. And finally, if you had the privilege of calling Bernard a colleague on the pastoral staff here at Loma Linda University Church, would you stand with me? Beautiful. Truly beautiful. So Alana, Clinton, Danelle, and the rest of his family, he was truly a multifaceted individual. Somebody who touched our lives in so many different ways. I honestly would have to be a part of 2 or 3 of those groups. Anita and I were members here. He was one of our pastors, so we were certainly part of that group. I had the honor of being at the School of Religion, now Faculty of Religion then. So he touched my life in that way. And I had a privilege of being his colleague here at Loma Linda University Church. If you want something intimidating, try to step in as a younger pastor helping to lead the crew, and there sits Bernard Taylor. And yet he was consistently gracious and humble and welcoming. Times when I would ask him questions about certain texts that I was trying to understand, he would give answers that exceeded what I had ever considered possible. He was a very gracious colleague and deeply appreciated and loved, not only by his colleagues, but by his church. He enriched us all. He left big footprints. I was thinking the other day that Bernard, when I had the privilege of joining the team, was our media pastor. And as such, he helped lay the foundation for much that was to come later. And for that, we are truly grateful. Dr. Larry Garrity mentioned earlier a trip that our pastoral team was able to take to the lands of the Bible now some years ago. The years get away, don't they, Larry? But now some years ago, and I have to tell you the joy it was to watch this esteemed scholar, this man of the book, somebody who probably forgot more than I'll ever know, watch him with the joy of a child approach one location after another and be able to describe and teach about what happened there. It was truly an experience of a lifetime. Anita was reminded me the experience of what happened when we got to the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. There, one of the displays, in fact, no doubt the center point of that museum, is a very unique structure that's round. And you have to go up some stairs, and there it is in the round, these Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran. I had already watched Bernard at Qumran take in all that lay before us, including the cave where the scrolls were first found. Anita reminded me that others in the group had gotten there before him and were trying their best to sort through where the lines were and what they might say, and they were even moving in this direction. And then Bernard came up and he started doing it in the exact opposite direction. Without a word, but just suddenly everybody is, oh yeah, that's right. It was that kind of experience. Truly a beautiful time. On February 18 of 2009, Bernard came to my office and said, "Randy, I have a gift I would like to give you. It is one that I've treasured, and I have to tell you, I have read it cover to cover." He wrote on the face page, "Randy, in the making of Bible translations, there is no end. In this version, I commend to you the Apocrypha, and in particular the books of Judith, Tobit, Esther, and the additions to Daniel." And then in Hebrew, which my Hebrew professor, Larry Garrity, helped me sort out, he writes the word either blessing or benediction, Bernard. Those are books that he translated, and from which I read these words, Alana, that he translated. Tobit 8, starting in verse 5. "And Tobias began to pray, 'Blessed are you, O God of our fathers, and blessed be your holy and glorious name forever. Let the heavens and all your creatures bless you. You made him Adam and gave him Eve as his wife, as a helper and support. From them the race of mankind has sprung. You said, it is not good that the man should be alone. Let us make a helper for him like himself. And now, O Lord, I am not taking this sister of mine because of lust, but with sincerity. I wonder what Bernard thought as he translated the following words. Grant that I may find mercy and may grow old together with her. Our lives truly have been deeply enriched by Bernard Taylor. One of the great gifts he has given us is on both sides of your program, as has already been pointed out on the front, Chesed. That magnificent, indescribable, profound, eternal, and undeserved love of God. And then on the back of the program, Bernard Taylor, February 2025. What it all comes down to is God is love. What greater assurance could we be left with than that? The fact that God is love. It is a reality that is echoed and re-echoed in Psalm 136. That reality of the love of the God that we turn to, we pray to, in whom we find hope. In fact, as in the immortal words of Psalm 136,
Adu l'Adonai ki tov, ki le'elam chesdo. O give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever.